She stood alone by the cake, the weight of 200 eyes pressing upon her shoulders like stones. The grand ballroom of Thornfield Manor glittered with candlelight, but Eleanor Lockhart felt only darkness closing in. Her betrothed, Lord Stirling Ashford, had not arrived for their engagement celebration. Then the whispers began. He had been seen in the garden with her own cousin, Charlotte. Eleanor's breath caught as the ballroom doors opened. But it was not Stirling who entered. It was the Duke of Greystoke, notorious, untouchable, walking directly toward her with purpose burning in his eyes. He stopped before her, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "For tonight, pretend you're with me. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which part of the world you're listening from. I want to know how far it has traveled." Eleanor Lockhart had been raised to understand her place in the world with the same certainty that she understood the turning of seasons. She was the eldest daughter of Baron Lockhart, a man of modest title but impeccable reputation. And from the moment of her birth, her future had been carefully plotted like coordinates on a naval chart. She would marry well. She would secure her family's position. She would be the bridge between her father's fading influence and a new generation of power. The drawing room of Lockhart House in Mayfair had become her classroom in the art of becoming someone else's wife. Her mother, Lady Catherine, supervised her education with the precision of a general planning a military campaign. French, Italian, watercolors, pianoforte, needlework, deportment. Eleanor excelled at all of it, not from passion, but from the understanding that excellence was her only currency in the marriage market. "Posture, Eleanor," her mother would say, tapping her shoulder with a folded fan. "A woman's bearing speaks before her words ever do." At 22, Eleanor had been presented at court 3 seasons prior, and while she had received several offers, her father had declined them all. He was waiting, she understood, for the right match. The match that would transform the Lockharts from respectable to remarkable. That match arrived in the form of Lord Stirling Ashford, heir to the Earl of Pemberton, a man whose family had held land in 3 counties since before the Norman conquest. Stirling was 31, possessed of a classical profile and impeccable tailoring, educated at Eton and Cambridge, connected to half the peerage through his mother's line. When he had called upon Baron Lockhart to request permission to court Eleanor, her father had barely contained his triumph. "You are a fortunate young woman," her mother had told her that evening, clasping Eleanor's hands in the privacy of her bedchamber. "The Ashfords are among the finest families in England. You will want for nothing." Eleanor had wanted to ask if she might want for love, but she knew the question would be dismissed as the foolish romanticism of novels. This was not a love match. This was an arrangement of mutual benefit. Stirling would gain a beautiful, accomplished wife from a respectable family, and Eleanor would gain security, status, and the fulfillment of her family's expectations. Still, she had allowed herself to hope. Stirling was handsome, after all, with his dark hair and serious grey eyes. He was unfailingly polite during their chaperoned meetings. He brought her flowers, white roses, always white roses, and complimented her playing when she performed at the pianoforte. He spoke of his family's estate in Hertfordshire, of the responsibilities he would inherit, of the life they would build together. "You will be an excellent countess," he had told her once, and she had chosen to hear affection in the statement rather than assessment. Their engagement had been announced in the Times 3 months ago, and since then, Eleanor's life had become a whirlwind of preparation. Her trousseau was being assembled. Dozens of gowns, morning dresses, evening gowns, travelling costumes, all in the latest fashions. Her mother had taken her to warehouses to select linens, to jewellers to discuss settings for the Lockhart pearls that would be her wedding gift. Guest lists were compiled, seating charts debated, menus selected. The wedding was to take place in 8 weeks at St. George's, Hanover Square, followed by a wedding breakfast at Ashford House in Berkeley Square. After that, they would honeymoon in Italy, Florence, Rome, Venice, and return in time for the autumn session of Parliament. where Sterling would take his seat in the House of Lords upon his father's retirement. Eleanor's days were consumed with fittings, lessons in household management from Sterling's mother, Lady Ashford, and an endless parade of social obligations. She was introduced to the family's circle, which included some of the most powerful names in England. She attended teas, dinners, and musical evenings, always aware that she was being evaluated, measured against an invisible standard. Lady Ashford was particularly exacting. A tall, angular woman with steel-grey hair and ice-blue eyes, she treated Eleanor with the same careful assessment one might give a piece of furniture being considered for purchase. "You must understand, Miss Lockhart, that the Ashford name carries certain expectations," she had said during one particularly uncomfortable tea at Ashford House. "We have maintained our position through careful stewardship and judicious alliances. Sterling's wife will be a reflection of our family's values." "I understand, my lady," Eleanor had replied, her teacup balanced perfectly in her hands, her posture impeccable. "Your family is respectable but modest. You will be rising above your station. That requires a particular humility." The words had stung, but Eleanor had maintained her composure. This was the bargain. She would trade her independence, her individuality, for the security of the Ashford name. Her cousin Charlotte, who often visited from her home in Kent, had a different perspective. Charlotte was Eleanor's age, but unmarried, the daughter of Baron Lockhart's younger brother, who had squandered his inheritance on poor investments. Where Eleanor was dark-haired and elegant, Charlotte was blonde and vivacious, with a sharp wit and sharper ambitions. "I don't know how you bear it," Charlotte had said one afternoon as they walked in Hyde Park, their maid trailing at a discreet distance. "Lady Ashford treats you like a servant. She wants to ensure I'm prepared for my responsibilities," Eleanor had replied, though the defense felt hollow even to her own ears. "She wants to ensure you're sufficiently cowed," Charlotte countered, "and Sterling is no better. Have you noticed how he looks at other women? At dinner parties, at the theatre. His eyes wander, Eleanor. You're imagining things." "Am I?" Charlotte's blue eyes had glittered with something Eleanor couldn't quite name. "Perhaps you're simply choosing not to see." Eleanor had dismissed the conversation, but the words had planted a seed of doubt. She had begun to notice things, the way Sterling's attention drifted when she spoke, how his compliments felt rehearsed, the distance in his grey eyes, even when he smiled. There was no warmth in him, no genuine curiosity about her thoughts or dreams. She was an asset to be acquired, not a partner to be cherished, but she had invested too much to withdraw now. The announcement had been made, the invitation sent, the gifts arriving daily at Lockhart House. To break the engagement would bring scandal upon her family, would mark her as unreliable, would destroy any chance of another respectable match. She was committed to this path as surely as a ship committed to the current once it left port. The engagement ball was to be held at Thornfield Manor, Lady Ashford's ancestral home in Hampshire, a grand estate with 70 rooms and grounds designed by Capability Brown. 200 guests were invited, the cream of society, from earls and viscounts to influential members of Parliament and their families. It would be Eleanor's formal introduction as Sterling's betrothed, the moment when her transformation from Miss Lockhart to the future Countess of Pemberton would be sealed before the eyes of everyone who mattered. Her gown for the evening had been commissioned from London's most fashionable modiste, ivory silk with delicate gold embroidery, off-the-shoulder sleeves, and a skirt that swept the floor like water. Her dark hair would be dressed with pearls, and she would wear the Lockhart family emeralds, the only truly valuable jewellery her family possessed. In the week before the ball, Eleanor had felt a growing sense of unease. Sterling had been increasingly absent, claiming business affairs required his attention. When they did meet, he seemed distracted, his conversation perfunctory. And Charlotte, who had been invited to stay at Lockhart House for the season, had become oddly secretive, disappearing for hours and returning with a mysterious smile. "You're being ridiculous," Eleanor told herself as her maid laced her into the ivory gown on the evening of the ball. This is nervousness, nothing more. Every bride feels this before her wedding. But as their carriage rolled through the gates of Thornfield Manor, past manicured lawns and ancient oak trees, past fountains and formal gardens, Eleanor felt the golden cage closing around her with every turn of the wheels. Thornfield Manor blazed with light, every window glowing like a jewel box against the darkening sky. Footmen in the Ashford livery lined the entrance, and as Eleanor descended from the carriage on her father's arm, she heard the strains of a chamber orchestra drifting from the ballroom. The grand hall was a marvel of Baroque architecture. Marble floors, gilded mouldings, portraits of Ashford ancestors gazing down with expressions of aristocratic superiority. Lady Ashford received them with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Miss Lockhart, how lovely you look. Sterling is attending to some final preparations. He will join us shortly." The words carried a strange emphasis that made Eleanor's stomach tighten, but she curtsied and murmured her thanks. Charlotte had arrived earlier with Eleanor's aunt and uncle, and Eleanor caught sight of her cousin across the hall, resplendent in rose-colored silk, laughing with a group of young men. The ballroom was transformed into a fantasy. Thousands of candles in crystal chandeliers, garlands of white roses and ivy draping every column, tables laden with champagne and delicacies. The guests were the finest of England's aristocracy, the women glittering with jewels, the men elegant in their evening dress. This was the world Eleanor was entering, a world of wealth and privilege that her parents had worked their entire lives to reach. At the center of the ballroom stood a magnificent cake, 5 tiers of white sugarwork and marzipan flowers, crowned with sugar sculptures of doves. It was a monument to excess, to the Ashford family's ability to command the finest of everything. Eleanor was meant to stand beside it with Sterling, while his father, the Earl of Pemberton, made the formal announcement of their engagement and their wedding date. But Sterling had not yet appeared. Eleanor stood near the cake, a fixed smile on her face, while minutes stretched into a quarter hour. The guests began to notice. Whispers started, curious glances thrown her way. Lady Ashford appeared at her side, her smile now sharp-edged. "I cannot imagine what is keeping him," she said in a tone that suggested she could imagine very well. "Perhaps you might check the gardens, Miss Lockhart. He mentioned wanting to see the new Rose Pavilion." It was not a suggestion, but a command. Eleanor, her cheeks burning, made her way through the crowd, aware of every eye tracking her progress. She slipped through the French doors onto the terrace, the cool evening air a relief after the stifling atmosphere of the ballroom. The gardens were lit with torches along the pathways, casting dancing shadows across the perfectly trimmed hedges. Eleanor followed the path toward the Rose Pavilion, her ivory gown ghostly in the torchlight. She could hear voices ahead, a man's low murmur, a woman's laugh. She stopped at the entrance to the pavilion, her hand pressed against the cool marble column. Sterling stood in the center of the circular structure, surrounded by climbing roses, locked in an embrace with Charlotte. Her cousin's blonde hair was disheveled, her rose silk gown crushed against Sterling's chest, and their lips were pressed together with an urgency that spoke of long practice, not sudden passion. Eleanor's breath left her body as if she had been struck. She must have made some sound, because they broke apart, and 2 pairs of eyes turned toward her, Sterling's grey eyes widening in surprise, Charlotte's blue eyes glittering with something that looked almost like satisfaction. "Eleanor," Sterling said, and his voice carried no guilt, only annoyance at being interrupted. "This is not what it appears." But it was exactly what it appeared. Eleanor could see it in the way Charlotte's hand still rested possessively on Sterling's chest, in the smudge of rouge on his collar, in the complete absence of shame in either of their expressions. "How long?" Eleanor heard herself ask, her voice surprisingly steady. Charlotte answered, her chin lifting defiantly. 3 months. Since the week after your engagement was announced. 3 months. While Eleanor had been planning their wedding, selecting china patterns, learning to manage a great house, Sterling had been conducting an affair with her own cousin. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that Eleanor felt dizzy with it. "You must understand," Sterling said, straightening his coat. "Charlotte and I have a genuine connection. What you and I have is an arrangement. A sensible arrangement, certainly, but devoid of real feeling." "Then why go through with the engagement?" Eleanor asked, though she already knew the answer. "Your family's reputation is unblemished, your bloodline is respectable, and you have been trained to be an acceptable countess. Charlotte, unfortunately, comes with certain liabilities." He glanced at Charlotte with something like regret. "Her father's financial difficulties make her unsuitable as my wife. But as my mistress, once we are married, she will—" "Stop!" Eleanor raised a hand, her whole body trembling now. "You planned this, both of you. You intended for me to be your respectable wife while you continued your affair." Charlotte stepped forward, her beautiful face twisted into a smile. "Don't be naive, Eleanor. This is how the world works. You would have your title, your position. Why should it matter what Sterling does in his private time? You never truly loved him anyway. You were fulfilling your duty just as you always do." Oh, the truth of that statement cut deeper than the betrayal. Eleanor realized, standing in that rose-scented pavilion, that she had allowed herself to be shaped into something convenient, something useful, something utterly devoid of genuine feeling. She had been so focused on meeting expectations that she had never asked herself what she actually wanted. "I see," Eleanor said quietly. Then, with a strength she didn't know she possessed, she removed the Ashford betrothal ring, a large sapphire surrounded by diamonds, from her finger and held it out. "Then I release you from our engagement, my lord." Sterling's expression darkened. "Don't be dramatic, Eleanor. Think of the scandal. Think of your family's position. We can resolve this discreetly." "No," Eleanor said, and the word felt like the first honest thing she had said in months. "We cannot. The engagement is over." She turned and walked back toward the ballroom, her legs somehow carrying her forward, though her vision had blurred with tears. Behind her, she heard Charlotte's voice, sharp with triumph. "Let her go. She'll realize she has no choice. She'll come crawling back within a week." But Eleanor knew she would not. Even if it meant disgrace, even if it meant becoming a cautionary tale whispered about in drawing rooms across London, she would not spend her life as a beautiful possession in a loveless arrangement. She entered the ballroom through the French doors, and the music faltered. 200 faces turned toward her, and she saw her mother rising from her seat, her father's face pale with concern. Lady Ashford moved toward her, her expression cold with fury. The room seemed to tilt, voices rising in a crescendo of shocked whispers. Eleanor stood alone by the cake, the symbol of a future that had just crumbled to ash, and felt the weight of her humiliation crash over her like a wave. Then the ballroom doors opened. A man entered, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the unconscious authority of someone who had never questioned his right to command any space he occupied. He was perhaps 35, with dark auburn hair, sharp green eyes, and a face that was more striking than handsome, strong jaw, aristocratic nose, a mouth that suggested both intelligence and a capacity for ruthlessness. His evening dress was impeccable, his bearing that of a man who answered to no one. The whispers changed, recognition rippling through the crowd. "The Duke of Greystoke," someone murmured. "What is he doing here?" Eleanor knew of him, of course. Everyone in London knew of Alexander Greystoke, the Duke of Greystoke, one of the wealthiest and most powerful peers in England. He was legendary, a war hero who had served with distinction in the Peninsular Campaign, a scholar who had studied at Oxford and travelled extensively on the continent, a man who managed his own vast estates with unprecedented success. He was also notorious for his independence, his refusal to be swayed by public opinion, and his complete disinterest in marriage, despite being one of the most eligible bachelors in the kingdom. He walked directly toward Eleanor, his green eyes fixed on her, with an intensity that made her breath catch. The crowd parted before him, and when he reached her, he stopped, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Miss Lockhart," he said, his voice pitched low enough for only her to hear, though every person in the ballroom was straining to listen. "Forgive my tardiness. I was unavoidably detained." Eleanor stared at him, confused. She had never met the Duke of Greystoke, had never been introduced. Why was he speaking to her with such familiarity? He stepped closer, and now his voice was barely a whisper, meant for her ears alone. "For tonight, pretend you're with me. Trust me, and I will give you a way out of this disaster with your dignity intact." Eleanor's mind reeled, but the Duke's eyes held hers with unwavering certainty, and in that moment, drowning in humiliation, she made a choice. She placed her trembling hand in his extended palm. "Your Grace," she managed, her voice somehow steady. "How good of you to come." Alexander Greystoke raised her gloved hand to his lips, a gesture of such deliberate intimacy that gasps echoed through the ballroom. Then he turned to face the assembled crowd, his voice carrying with the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "I must apologize to Lord Ashford and Lady Ashford for this intrusion, but circumstances have changed rather dramatically. Miss Lockhart and I have been acquainted for some months through mutual friends, and I have found myself quite unable to remain silent any longer." He paused, his green eyes sweeping the room with a challenge that no one dared meet. "I have come tonight to ask Miss Lockhart to do me the extraordinary honor of considering my suit." The ballroom erupted. Eleanor heard her mother's cry of shock, saw Lady Ashford's face turn the colour of parchment, watched as Sterling and Charlotte emerged from the gardens just in time to witness the Duke of Greystoke, one of the most powerful men in England, publicly declaring his interest in the woman Sterling had just betrayed. It was a masterpiece of social warfare. The Duke had taken Eleanor's humiliation and transformed it into triumph. No one would dare criticize a woman who had captured the attention of Alexander Greystoke. The scandal of a broken engagement would be utterly eclipsed by the far more interesting story of a Duke's unexpected romantic gesture. Within minutes, the Duke had extracted Eleanor from the ballroom, her parents in stunned attendance, and installed them all in his carriage, a magnificent vehicle emblazoned with the Greystoke arms. As the horses pulled away from Thornfield Manor, Eleanor finally found her voice. "Why did you do that? We've never even met." The Duke leaned back against the velvet cushions, his expression unreadable in the dim interior. "I was a friend of your late uncle, Colonel Thomas Lockhart. He saved my life during the Peninsula Campaign, and I made him a promise that if his family ever needed assistance, I would provide it. Your father wrote to me 3 days ago, expressing concerns about your engagement. I've been investigating Lord Ashford's character, and what I discovered was not encouraging. I arrived tonight intending to speak with you privately, but it seems events accelerated beyond anyone's control." Eleanor's father, sitting across from them, nodded slowly. "I should have trusted my instincts. The Ashfords were too eager, too insistent. I thought I was securing your future, Eleanor. Instead, I nearly sold you to a man of no honor. The question now," the Duke continued, "is what happens next. The story of this evening will be in every newspaper by morning. I have given you temporary protection, but we must decide on a strategy." Eleanor looked at him, this stranger who had appeared like something from a novel to rescue her. "What do you suggest, Your Grace?" "Call me Alexander if we're to maintain this fiction convincingly. I suggest you come to London, to my aunt's residence. Lady Agatha Pembroke is one of society's great arbiters of taste and respectability. Under her guidance, you can be seen in public with me in ways that will solidify the narrative that our courtship preceded your engagement to Ashford. In 6 weeks, when the scandal has faded, you can decide whether you wish to maintain the pretense or quietly withdraw." "Ah, and what do you gain from this arrangement?" Eleanor asked, studying his face in the passing streetlight. Alexander smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his severe features into something almost warm. "I gain the satisfaction of honoring my debt to your uncle. And perhaps, Miss Lockhart, I gain the companionship of an interesting woman for a few weeks. I confess, London society has grown tedious. You might prove an entertaining diversion." They arrived at Lady Agatha Pembroke's townhouse on Grosvenor Square in the early hours of the morning. Lady Agatha herself answered the door, a tall, elegant woman of perhaps 60, with silver hair and the same piercing green eyes as her nephew. She took in the situation with one sweeping glance and immediately took charge. "Splendid," she declared. "I've been telling Alexander for years that he needs more drama in his life. Come in, all of you. We have much to plan." The following days were a whirlwind. Lady Agatha moved through London society with the precision of a chess master, attending strategic teas, dropping carefully worded hints, ensuring that the story of Alexander and Eleanor's romance was shaped to their advantage. The newspapers were full of speculation. The Duke of Greystoke, long resistant to marriage, finally captured by the lovely Miss Lockhart. The broken engagement to Lord Ashford was mentioned only in passing, with veiled suggestions that Miss Lockhart had discovered certain incompatibilities of temperament that made the match untenable. Eleanor found herself living in Lady Agatha's beautiful home, her days filled with a different kind of education. Where Lady Ashford had sought to diminish her, Lady Agatha sought to expand her world. "You've been trained to be decorative," Lady Agatha said over breakfast one morning. "I shall teach you to be formidable." She introduced Eleanor to her circle, a remarkable collection of women who were scholars, writers, reformers, and intellectuals. There was Mrs. Caroline Norton, the famous author and advocate for women's rights. There was Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, one of the first women physicians. There was Miss Harriet Martineau, the political economist and journalist. These women spoke of ideas, of justice, of the limitations placed upon women and their determination to transcend them. They asked Eleanor her opinions and actually listened to her answers. They recommended books, Mary Wollstonecraft, John Stuart Mill, revolutionary texts that challenged everything Eleanor had been taught about a woman's proper place. "Your mind has been in prison," Lady Agatha told her one afternoon as they sat in the library. "It's time to set it free." And then there was Alexander himself. He called each day, as propriety demanded, for a man courting a woman, but their conversations were nothing like the stilted exchanges Eleanor had endured with Sterling. Alexander discussed politics, philosophy, his travels in Greece and Italy. He asked her questions about her reading, her thoughts on current events, her dreams for the future. "I don't know what I dream of," Eleanor admitted one afternoon as they walked through Hyde Park, Lady Agatha trailing discreetly behind. "I've spent my entire life learning to fulfill other people's expectations." "Then, perhaps," Alexander said quietly, "this is your opportunity to discover what you expect of yourself." In the third week of her residence at Lady Agatha's house, Eleanor attended a lecture at the Royal Institution on Advances in Chemistry. She sat in the gallery designated for ladies, but found herself fascinated by the demonstration of electrical properties. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed, she lingered to examine the apparatus that had been used. Interested in natural philosophy, Miss Lockhart, she turned to find a tall, lean man with dark hair greying at the temples and warm brown eyes behind wire spectacles. He was perhaps 40, dressed in a somewhat rumpled coat that suggested a man who cared more for ideas than appearances. "I am, though I confess my education in the sciences has been limited. A common tragedy," he said with a smile. "Allow me to introduce myself. Dr. Elias Grayson, Professor of Chemistry at King's College. I notice you've been attending lectures regularly. It's unusual to see a woman with genuine interest in the subject." They spoke for nearly an hour, and Eleanor found herself energized by the conversation in a way that was entirely new. Dr. Grayson treated her not as a decorative ornament, but as a thinking person, explaining complex concepts without condescension, encouraging her questions. "There is much you could learn, Miss Lockhart, if you had access to proper instruction," he said as they parted. "I give private tutorials on occasion. If you're interested, I would be honored to count you among my students." Eleanor mentioned the conversation to Lady Agatha that evening. "Elias Grayson," Lady Agatha said thoughtfully. "Brilliant man. unconventional. His family is old but not wealthy, and he chose scholarship over society. He would be an excellent teacher. Over the following weeks, Eleanor began attending tutorials at Dr. Grayson's modest rooms near the college. She discovered she had a natural aptitude for scientific thinking, for the careful observation and logical analysis that the discipline required. More than that, she discovered she enjoyed it. The challenge, the intellectual rigor, the sense of understanding how the world actually worked, rather than simply accepting what she was told. Alexander noticed the change in her. "You're different," he said one evening at a reception at the Austrian embassy. "You seem more present somehow." "I'm learning what I'm capable of," Eleanor replied, surprised by the truth of it. "For the first time, I'm choosing something for myself, not because it's expected or required." "And what do you choose, Eleanor?" She looked at him, this man who had given her refuge, who had asked nothing in return except that she discover who she might become. He was handsome, certainly, and powerful, and kind in his own reserved way. But what she felt for him was gratitude, friendship, respect, not the breathless passion that novels described. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I'm grateful to be in a position to choose at all." The 6 weeks had passed, and with them, Eleanor's transformation. She no longer felt like the docile young woman who had stood alone by that cake in humiliation. She felt capable, alive, curious about the world beyond the narrow confines of society's expectations. But London was beginning to whisper that the Duke of Greystoke should make a formal announcement of his intentions. The pretense that had saved Eleanor's reputation was beginning to demand a conclusion. Lady Agatha hosted a grand reception at her Grosvenor Square townhouse, ostensibly to celebrate the opening of a new art exhibition, but everyone in attendance understood its true purpose. This was Eleanor Lockhart's official return to society, her first major appearance since the scandal at Thornfield Manor 2 months prior. The guest list was carefully curated. 200 of London's most influential figures, from cabinet ministers to celebrated artists, from foreign diplomats to the acknowledged leaders of society. Eleanor prepared for the evening with a strange mixture of nervousness and excitement. She wore a gown of deep sapphire silk that brought out the intensity of her dark eyes, her hair dressed in an elegant style that was sophisticated rather than girlish. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. She had gained weight, a healthy glow replacing the brittle thinness that had come from trying to mold herself into the Ashford ideal. Her eyes were brighter, her expression more confident. "You look formidable," Lady Agatha said approvingly. "Alexander will be speechless." But when Eleanor descended the stairs to the reception, it wasn't Alexander's reaction that caught her attention first. It was the sight of Sterling Ashford and Charlotte standing near the entrance in conversation with Lord and Lady Melbourne. Lady Agatha had insisted they be invited. "You cannot spend your life avoiding them," she had said. "Better to face them on ground of your choosing, surrounded by allies." Eleanor paused on the landing, her hand on the marble balustrade, and watched Sterling catch sight of her. His grey eyes widened fractionally, and she saw something that might have been regret flicker across his face. Charlotte, in contrast, merely raised her chin defiantly, though her smile was brittle. Alexander appeared at the base of the stairs, magnificent in his evening dress, and extended his hand to Eleanor. "Shall we?" he murmured, and she descended to join him. The evening unfolded like a carefully choreographed ballet. Alexander introduced Eleanor to influential figures she had never previously had access to: the Russian ambassador who discussed Pushkin's poetry, Lady Holland, the famous political hostess who invited Eleanor to her exclusive salon, Lord Byron's publisher who asked her opinion on the Romantic movement. Eleanor discovered that her recent education served her well. She could discuss literature, philosophy, scientific discoveries. She was no longer simply a beautiful decoration, but an engaging conversationalist, and she saw respect kindle in the eyes of those she spoke with. Dr. Grayson arrived midway through the evening, slightly dishevelled as always, but with a warm smile for Eleanor. "Miss Lockhart," I brought you that monograph on electrical theory we discussed. I thought you might find it illuminating." Sterling, standing nearby with Charlotte, overheard the exchange. He moved closer, his expression carefully neutral. "Miss Lockhart, might I have a word?" Eleanor glanced at Alexander, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. She allowed Sterling to escort her to a quieter corner of the reception room. "You look well," Sterling said, and there was genuine surprise in his voice. "Better than I've ever seen you, if I'm honest." "Thank you, Eleanor. I made a grave error. I've had time to reflect, and I realize now what I threw away. You were everything I should have wanted, beautiful, accomplished, from a good family. I was a fool to risk losing you." Eleanor studied him. This man she had once thought she would marry, and felt nothing. No lingering affection, no satisfaction at his regret, just a mild curiosity. "You're mistaken, Sterling. You never had me to lose. You had a version of me that I was performing, a role I was playing. That woman doesn't exist anymore." "Because of him?" Sterling's eyes flickered toward Alexander, who was watching them from across the room. "The Duke of Greystoke? You cannot truly prefer him to me. This is all theatre, Eleanor, a performance to save your reputation." "Perhaps it began that way," Eleanor said quietly. "But what I've found in these past weeks is something far more valuable than a duke's name or a countess's coronet. I've found myself, and now that I have, I cannot imagine returning to the cage you offered me." Charlotte joined them, linking her arm possessively through Sterling's. "How touching," she said, her voice sharp with mockery. "Eleanor discovering herself. But discoveries don't pay bills or maintain position, cousin. You may have captured the Duke's temporary interest, but men like that don't marry women like you. He's simply amusing himself while he looks for a bride of appropriate rank." "Lady Charlotte makes an excellent point," came a new voice, cool and authoritative. Lady Ashford had joined their small circle, her expression one of cold satisfaction. "The Duke of Greystoke is one of the premier peers of England. His eventual Duchess will be the daughter of a Duke or Earl at minimum, not the daughter of a mere Baron. Whatever arrangement you've made with him, Miss Lockhart, it cannot end in marriage. You would be wise to reconsider Sterling's suit before it's too late. I'm certain we could overlook your indiscretion." Eleanor felt a flash of anger, but before she could respond, Alexander was at her side, his hand settling possessively at the small of her back. "Lady Ashford," he said with icy courtesy, "I couldn't help but overhear your assessment of appropriate matches. Allow me to educate you on a point of fact. I will marry whom I choose, when I choose, for whatever reasons I deem sufficient. And I have never, in my 35 years, given a damn about anyone's opinion on the matter save my own." The crudity of his language, saying damn in mixed company, was a calculated insult that made Lady Ashford's face flush with anger. But she could not call out a duke for ungentlemanly behaviour, not when half the aristocracy of England was in attendance. Alexander turned to Eleanor, his green eyes warm, despite the coldness of his voice when he addressed the others. "Dr. Grayson is about to give an informal lecture on his recent research. I believe you wanted to hear it." "Very much," Eleanor said, grateful for the escape. They moved toward the library where Dr. Grayson was setting up a small demonstration, leaving Sterling, Charlotte, and Lady Ashford in their wake. The library filled quickly with the more intellectually curious guests, and Eleanor found herself seated beside Alexander, listening to Dr. Grayson explain his theories about chemical reactions. But she was distracted by awareness of Alexander beside her, by the proprietary way he had touched her, by his fierce defense of her. She glanced at him and found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. The lecture concluded, and as guests began to drift back to the main reception, Dr. Grayson approached Eleanor. "Miss Lockhart, I wonder if I might speak with you privately for a moment." They stepped onto the small balcony outside the library, where Chinese lanterns cast soft light across the evening shadows. Dr. Grayson seemed uncharacteristically nervous, his hands fidgeting with his spectacles. "I have a proposition to present to you," he said finally. I've been offered a position at the newly established University of London with the specific mandate to develop a modern curriculum in the sciences. It's an unprecedented opportunity and I've accepted. The position comes with housing, a comfortable residence in Bloomsbury. That's wonderful news, Eleanor said, genuinely pleased for him. You must be delighted. I am, but I find myself in an unusual position. Miss Lockhart, Eleanor, if I may, these past weeks of teaching you have been among the most rewarding of my career. You have a remarkable mind, a genuine passion for learning, and a capacity for original thinking that is extraordinarily rare. I've never met anyone quite like you. Eleanor's heart began to beat faster. Dr. Grayson, please let me finish. I am not a romantic man by nature. I am awkward in society, absent-minded, more comfortable with books than people. I cannot offer you the wealth or position that the Duke of Greystoke can. But I can offer you a partnership of minds, a life dedicated to intellectual pursuit and the freedom to continue your studies formally. The University of London is progressive. They are considering admitting women to lectures. With my sponsorship, you could be among the first. He was proposing. This kind, brilliant man was offering her exactly what she had discovered she wanted. The life of the mind, the pursuit of knowledge, a partnership based on genuine compatibility rather than social advancement. I am honored, Eleanor said softly. Truly, profoundly honored. But I must ask you to give me time. There are complications. The Duke, Dr. Grayson said, and there was no bitterness in his voice, only understanding. I know. I've seen how he looks at you, Eleanor, and how you look at him. Whatever began as pretense has become something else, hasn't it? Eleanor realized with a start that he was right. Somewhere in the past weeks, between their conversations and walks and shared silences, she had developed feelings for Alexander that went far beyond gratitude. She admired his intelligence, his integrity, his quiet humor. She felt safe with him, but also challenged, seen in a way she had never been seen before. I don't know what I feel, she admitted. Everything is so confused. Then I will wait for clarity, Dr. Grayson said gently. I return to Bloomsbury tomorrow to prepare for my new position, but I will be in London through the autumn. If you decide that a life of scholarship holds more appeal than a life of society, you know where to find me. He squeezed her hand briefly and departed, leaving Eleanor alone on the balcony with her tumultuous thoughts. Alexander found her there a few minutes later. He stood beside her in silence for a moment, looking out over the gaslit streets of London. He proposed, didn't he? Alexander said finally. How did you know? I know the look of a man who's found something precious and fears losing it. Alexander turned to face her, his expression serious. He would be good for you, Eleanor. He would give you what you've discovered you want. Intellectual freedom, purpose, a genuine partnership. I cannot offer those things. My life is one of duty, estates to manage, political responsibilities, social obligations. My Duchess would be required to fulfill certain roles, to prioritize appearances and position. It would be, in many ways, another cage. Then why are you telling me this? Eleanor asked, her throat tight. Because you deserve the truth. This pretense between us has served its purpose. Your reputation is restored. You have options now. You can choose the life you want, rather than accepting what's been chosen for you. I would not have you trade one obligation for another, even if— He paused, seeming to struggle with words for the first time since she'd known him. Even if I have come to care for you more than I anticipated. Eleanor's heart ached. What are you saying, Alexander? I'm saying, choose freely, Eleanor. Choose the life that will make you happy, whether that includes me or not. You owe me nothing. Your uncle saved my life, and I have repaid that debt by giving you time to discover who you are. But whatever happens next must be your decision. Before Eleanor could respond, Lady Agatha appeared at the balcony door. Alexander, Lord Russell is asking for you. Something about a vote in Parliament. She glanced between them, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Take your time, both of you. Some decisions cannot be rushed. Alexander left, and Eleanor remained on the balcony, suspended between two futures, one offering intellectual fulfillment and modest comfort, the other offering partnership with a man she had come to care for deeply, but with responsibilities that might constrain her newly discovered self. The morning after Lady Agatha's reception, Eleanor woke to find London engulfed in gossip. The newspapers had seized upon the evening's drama with gleeful intensity. "Duke defends mysterious Miss Lockhart," proclaimed the Morning Chronicle. "Ashford engagement revealed as narrow escape," announced the Times, with a scathing editorial about Lord Sterling Ashford's character. But it was the speculation about Alexander's intentions that dominated every society column. "The Duke of Greystoke has been observed in the company of Miss Eleanor Lockhart for nearly 2 months," wrote one influential society reporter. "Such prolonged and public courtship can only end in one way. We anticipate an announcement imminently." Lady Agatha joined Eleanor for breakfast. The newspapers spread across the table between them. "London is demanding a resolution," she said bluntly. "You must make a decision, my dear. Alexander will not press you, but society will. And I confess I am curious myself. What do you want, Eleanor?" "I want—" Eleanor paused, trying to articulate the tumult of feelings inside her. "I want to continue my studies. I want to matter for something beyond my appearance or my connections. I want to think, to learn, to contribute something meaningful to the world. All admirable goals. Do they require you to refuse Alexander? Dr. Grayson's offer would give me exactly what I desire. A life of scholarship, formal education, partnership with someone who shares my intellectual passions." "But you don't love him," Lady Agatha said gently. "You love my nephew." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "I do. I love Alexander's strength and kindness, his intelligence and integrity. But Lady Ashford was right about one thing. The Duke of Greystoke's wife must be more than a woman with intellectual interests. She must be a duchess, must manage great houses, entertain royalty, fulfill political and social obligations. Can I do that and still be myself?" Lady Agatha smiled, a knowing expression that made her look remarkably like her nephew. "My dear girl, being a duchess is not a prison sentence. It is a position of extraordinary influence and power if you choose to use it that way. Do you know what I did as the wife of Lord Pembroke, one of the most powerful men in England? I created salons where women could discuss politics and philosophy. I funded scholarships for female students. I used my position to amplify voices that would otherwise never be heard. You could do the same, on an even greater scale as a duchess." But Alexander said his life was one of duty and obligation, "because he has never had anyone worth sharing it with," Lady Agatha interrupted. "Alexander has spent 15 years managing his estates alone, fulfilling his responsibilities alone, because he refused to marry a woman he couldn't respect intellectually. He built walls around himself, convinced that duty and happiness were incompatible. But you, Eleanor, you've breached those walls. I've seen the change in him these past weeks. He laughs more freely, engages more deeply. You've reminded him that life can be more than obligation." Eleanor absorbed this, her mind racing. "What if I fail? What if I cannot be both the Duchess society requires and the woman I've discovered I am?" "Then you will learn, as all women of substance must, to balance competing demands. It won't be easy, but nothing worth having ever is." Lady Agatha reached across the table and squeezed Eleanor's hand. "The question is not whether you can do it perfectly. The question is whether you want to try, with Alexander by your side." That afternoon, Eleanor visited Sterling and Charlotte. She found them at Ashford House in Berkeley Square, where they were now living openly together despite the scandal it had caused. Charlotte's father had disowned her, and Sterling's parents were barely speaking to their son, but the couple seemed defiant in their choice. Charlotte received Eleanor in the drawing-room with wary hostility. "Come to gloat, cousin." "No," Eleanor said quietly. "I came to understand." Sterling joined them, looking less polished than Eleanor had ever seen him. There were shadows under his grey eyes, and his cravat was carelessly tied. "I need to know," Eleanor said, addressing them both. "Were you ever truly in love with me, Sterling, or was I always simply convenient?" Sterling had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I thought I could be content with convenience. You were everything I should have wanted, beautiful, accomplished, from a respectable family. But Charlotte—" He glanced at her with an expression Eleanor had never seen on his face during their engagement, genuine vulnerability. "With Charlotte I feel alive. She challenges me, infuriates me, makes me feel things I didn't know I was capable of feeling." "Even if it costs you your inheritance?" Eleanor asked. "My father is threatening to disinherit me. Charlotte's father has cut her off entirely. We may end up living in a modest house in Surrey rather than a grand estate. But yes, even then." Sterling met Eleanor's eyes. "I was cruel to you, and I'm sorry for that. You deserved honesty, not betrayal, but I cannot regret choosing Charlotte, even at such cost." Eleanor looked at Charlotte, her cousin who had been her rival and tormentor. "Do you love him?" Charlotte's mask slipped, revealing something raw and real beneath. "I do. I know you think me shallow and grasping, and perhaps I am. But Sterling sees past that to something deeper. With him, I don't have to pretend to be better than I am. He accepts me, flaws and all." It was, Eleanor realized, exactly what she had wanted from Sterling and never received. To be seen, accepted, valued for her true self, rather than her performance of propriety. They had found that with each other, even if the finding had come through betrayal and scandal. "Then I wish you happiness," Eleanor said, and meant it. Genuine happiness, not the carefully constructed version we're all trained to pursue. As Eleanor left Ashford House, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Sterling and Charlotte's choice had been selfish and cruel in its execution, but there was something admirable about their willingness to pay such a high price for authentic feeling. They had chosen love over position, passion over security. Could Eleanor do the same? She returned to Grosvenor Square to find Alexander waiting in Lady Agatha's drawing room. He stood when she entered, his expression uncertain, an emotion she had rarely seen on his self-assured face. "I've made a decision," Eleanor said before she could lose her courage. "But first I need to know something. Alexander, what do you want? Not what duty requires, not what society expects. What do you want?" He crossed the room to stand before her, his green eyes intense. "I want you. I want your intelligence and your passion and your stubborn determination to understand the world, rather than simply accept it. I want to hear your opinions on politics and philosophy, to debate ideas with you, to watch you grow and change and become whatever extraordinary thing you're meant to be. I want to build a life with you that matters, that contributes something beyond maintaining our position, even if it means your duchess is unconventional, even if I continue my studies, refuse certain social obligations, challenge expectations." "Especially then," Alexander said, a smile breaking across his face. "Eleanor, I am so tired of conventional. I've spent 15 years surrounded by women who say what I want to hear, who pretend to be whatever they think I desire. You are the first woman I've met who has the courage to be herself, regardless of whether it pleases anyone else. Why would I want you to be any different?" "Then I choose you," Eleanor said, her heart pounding. "I choose the life we could build together, even knowing it won't be easy. I choose partnership over solitude, shared purpose over individual pursuit. I choose you, Alexander, not for your title or position, but because you see me as I truly am and value me for it." Alexander drew her into his arms, and when he kissed her, it was nothing like Sterling's perfunctory attentions. This was passion tempered with respect, desire combined with genuine affection. When they finally broke apart, Eleanor was breathless. "We'll announce the engagement tomorrow," Alexander said, "and we'll marry as soon as the banns can be called, unless you prefer a long engagement." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "I've had quite enough of engagements. Let's marry quickly and begin our life together." Lady Agatha's delighted laughter echoed from the doorway. "Finally, I was beginning to think you two would dance around each other indefinitely. Alexander, go fetch the Greystoke betrothal ring from your study. Eleanor, we have a wedding to plan." The announcement appeared in the Times the following morning. The Duke of Greystoke is pleased to announce his engagement to Miss Eleanor Lockhart, daughter of Baron and Lady Lockhart. The wedding will take place at St. James's Church, Piccadilly, in 3 weeks' time. London society erupted in speculation and commentary, but Eleanor found she didn't care. She had made her choice, and it was the right one. Eleanor also wrote to Dr. Grayson, explaining her decision and thanking him for the alternative he had offered. His reply was gracious. "I am happy for you, Eleanor. The Duke is a fortunate man. Please know that my offer of mentorship remains open. Perhaps the Duchess of Greystoke will become one of the University of London's great patrons." Eleanor smiled when she read the letter. Perhaps she would. 6 months later, Eleanor stood in the magnificent library of Greystoke Hall in Derbyshire, surrounded by leather-bound volumes and the faint scent of beeswax and wood smoke. The autumn rain pattered against the tall windows, but inside a fire crackled warmly in the marble hearth. She held in her hands the first printed pamphlet from the Greystoke Foundation for Women's Education, an initiative she had founded with Alexander's full support to provide scholarships and educational opportunities for women of all backgrounds. The transformation in her life since that humiliating evening at Thornfield Manor was so complete that sometimes Eleanor had to pause and marvel at it. She was now the Duchess of Greystoke, mistress of 3 great estates, with an income at her disposal that would have seemed unimaginable a year ago. But more importantly, she had become the woman she was meant to be: active, engaged, purposeful. The wedding had been a grand affair, attended by half the aristocracy of England, but it was the private moments that Eleanor treasured most. Their wedding night, when Alexander had approached her with tenderness and genuine passion. The first morning she woke as his wife in the great ducal bedroom at Greystoke House in London, and felt not trapped, but liberated. The moment he had presented her with a magnificent laboratory in their Derbyshire estate, complete with all the modern equipment, where she could continue her scientific studies. "You'll need space to pursue your interests," he had said simply. "I had it designed to Dr. Grayson's specifications." And pursue them she had. Eleanor's days were full, managing the great house, yes, and entertaining guests appropriate to their position, certainly, but also attending lectures in London, corresponding with other women scholars, writing papers on her own research in chemistry. Dr. Grayson had kept his promise to mentor her, and through his connections she had been admitted to attend lectures at the University of London, one of the first women to do so. More than that, Eleanor had discovered that being a duchess gave her a platform to effect real change. She had used her position to advocate for reforms in education, to support charitable institutions that helped women in poverty, to create opportunities that had never existed before. Lady Agatha had been right. Power and influence, when used thoughtfully, could reshape society. Alexander had been her partner in all of it. He managed his estates with progressive practices that improved the lives of his tenants, spoke in Parliament on issues of reform, supported Eleanor's initiatives without reservation. Their marriage was not a fairy tale romance. They disagreed on matters of politics and philosophy, challenged each other's assumptions, sometimes argued with genuine heat. But beneath it all was respect, affection, and a shared commitment to building something meaningful together. She heard footsteps in the corridor and turned to find Alexander entering the library, still in his riding clothes, his dark auburn hair slightly damp from the rain. "How was your meeting with the tenants?" Eleanor asked. "Productive. We've agreed to modernize the farming techniques on the eastern parcels. It will increase yields and improve their income." He crossed to her, glancing at the pamphlet in her hands. "Is that from the printer?" "Just arrived this morning. The first class of scholarship recipients will begin their studies in January. 20 young women from across England," Eleanor said, her voice bright with excitement. Alexander pulled her into his arms, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You're remarkable, do you know that? Most duchesses content themselves with managing households and making charitable donations. You're changing the entire structure of educational opportunity." "I have an excellent partner," Eleanor said, leaning into him. "None of this would be possible without your support." They stood together for a moment in comfortable silence, watching the rain streak down the library windows. This was the life Eleanor had chosen. Not the gilded cage she had nearly accepted, not the isolated scholarship she might have pursued with Dr. Grayson, but something richer and more complex. A partnership that allowed her to be fully herself while contributing to something larger. "I had a letter from Lady Agatha this morning," Alexander said. "She's invited us to her salon next week. There's a philosopher from Germany she wants you to meet, and apparently Lord Russell wants to discuss your education initiatives." "We'll go," Eleanor said decisively, "and afterward I'd like to visit Dr. Grayson's laboratory at the university. He's made breakthroughs in electrolysis that I want to understand." Alexander laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "My Duchess, the scientist. Society still doesn't quite know what to make of you." "I don't particularly care what society makes of me," Eleanor said with a smile. "I know what I've made of myself, and that's enough." Later that afternoon, Eleanor sat at her writing desk, composing a letter to a young woman in Manchester who had applied for one of the Foundation's scholarships. She had established a policy of personally corresponding with each applicant, wanting them to know that their ambitions were seen and valued. A knock at the study door announced the butler. "Your Grace, Lord and Lady Ashford have called. They're in the green drawing room." Eleanor felt a jolt of surprise. She hadn't seen Sterling or Charlotte since that day she'd visited them in London 6 months ago. "Tell them I'll join them shortly." She found them waiting in the elegant drawing room, looking prosperous, if not precisely happy. Charlotte's blonde hair was dressed fashionably, and she wore an expensive silk gown, though not as expensive as what she might have worn as Lady Ashford, with full access to the family fortune. Sterling stood by the window, his posture stiff with discomfort. "Eleanor, Duchess, I should say," Charlotte began awkwardly. "Thank you for seeing us." "Of course," Eleanor said, gesturing for them to sit. "What brings you to Derbyshire?" Sterling spoke, his voice formal. "We wanted to inform you personally before you heard through gossip. My father passed away last month. I am now the Earl of Pemberton, and Charlotte is the Countess." Eleanor felt a pang of sympathy. Whatever their past betrayals, loss was still loss. "I'm sorry for your grief." "Thank you," Sterling said quietly. "The estate is complicated. My father altered his will in the final months to leave me far less than I anticipated. Much of the property is entailed, but the liquid assets and unentailed lands went to my younger brother. Charlotte and I will be comfortable, but not wealthy, as we might have been." "We're learning to manage," Charlotte added, her usual defiance notably absent. "It's different from what we expected, but we're finding our way." Eleanor studied them both, these two people who had caused her such pain and inadvertently given her such freedom. They seemed diminished somehow, not by their reduced circumstances, but by a hollowness in their expressions. They had chosen passion over position, but the cost had been higher than they'd anticipated. "Are you happy?" Eleanor asked directly. Charlotte and Sterling exchanged glances. "We love each other," Charlotte said finally. "That hasn't changed, but love doesn't pay the bills or restore family relationships or ease the isolation we sometimes feel. We made our choice, and we live with the consequences." "I suppose we came here to apologize," Sterling said, meeting Eleanor's eyes, "for how we treated you, for the cruelty of the betrayal. You deserved better. And perhaps," he gestured at the magnificent room, the visible evidence of Eleanor's position and success, "perhaps things worked out as they should have." Eleanor considered this. A year ago she would have been devastated by their betrayal. 6 months ago she had found peace with it. Now she felt only a distant sympathy for them. "I forgive you," she said simply. What happened between us led me to a life I never would have imagined, one that suits me far better than the path I was on. I cannot regret the outcome, even if the journey was painful. I hope you find contentment in your choices, as I have found in mine." After they departed, Eleanor stood at the window watching their carriage disappear down the long drive. Alexander joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am," Eleanor said, and realized it was completely true. "I look at them and feel only gratitude. Their betrayal freed me to become myself. It led me to you, to this life, to purpose and meaning I never would have discovered otherwise." "Everything happens as it should," Alexander murmured. "No," Eleanor corrected gently. "Everything happens as we make it happen." Sterling and Charlotte made choices that left them diminished. I made choices that allowed me to grow. The difference wasn't fate, but determination to forge my own path rather than accept what others chose for me. As evening fell over Greystoke Hall, Eleanor and Alexander dined together in the smaller family dining room rather than the grand formal space. They talked about the foundation, about Alexander's upcoming speech in Parliament, about the new experiments Dr. Grayson was conducting, about the books Eleanor was reading. After dinner, they retreated to the library, where Alexander read correspondence, while Eleanor worked on a paper about her recent chemical research. The fire crackled softly. Rain continued its gentle percussion against the windows, and Eleanor felt a contentment so profound it almost frightened her. This was what she had been searching for without knowing it, not romance for romance's sake, not position for its own sake, but a partnership that allowed her to be fully human, complex, flawed, brilliant, striving, growing. With Alexander, she didn't have to choose between intellect and feeling, between duty and desire, between being a duchess and being a scholar. She could be all of it, woven together into something whole. "What are you smiling about?" Alexander asked, glancing up from his papers. "I'm thinking about how strange life is," Eleanor said. "A year ago, I stood alone by a cake at Thornfield Manor, humiliated and heartbroken, certain my life was ruined. Now, I stand here in this magnificent library, married to a man I love and respect, pursuing work that matters to me, using my position to help other women find the opportunities I've found. If someone had told me then that betrayal would lead to such happiness, I would never have believed it." Alexander set aside his papers and came to sit beside her. "You know what I think? I think that evening at Thornfield Manor didn't ruin your life. It revealed what your life could be. Sometimes we need our carefully constructed futures to collapse so we can build something better from the ruins." "Is that what happened to you?" Eleanor asked. "Before you met me?" "In a way. I spent 15 years building walls, convincing myself that duty and happiness were incompatible, that I could never find someone who would be both suitable and genuinely interesting. Then you came crashing into my orderly existence, and everything changed. You reminded me that life is meant to be lived, not simply endured." Eleanor leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the quiet strength that had been her refuge and her inspiration. "I love you," she said simply. "And I love you," Alexander replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "My brilliant, stubborn, revolutionary duchess. You have transformed everything, my life, my perspective, my understanding of what marriage can be. I cannot imagine my world without you in it." They sat together as the fire burned low and the rain gradually ceased. Two people who had found in each other something rare and precious. The freedom to be themselves completely, the support to become more than they had imagined, and the love that came from truly seeing and valuing another person's authentic self. Eleanor had chosen her path, and it had led her here, to this moment, to this life. Not the life she had been raised to expect, not the safe, conventional future that had been planned for her, but something infinitely better. A life of meaning and purpose, of intellectual passion and genuine partnership, of using privilege and position to create opportunity rather than simply preserve tradition. She had bloomed where she was planted, but more than that, she had chosen where to plant herself, had cultivated her own garden rather than accepting whatever plot had been assigned to her. And in that choice lay all the difference. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting me know what you thought. Your support means everything and helps me continue creating these historical dramas. Thank you for listening, and until next time, may you always have the courage to choose your own path.